The 6 o'clock news from the BBC with Sue Lawley and Nicholas Witchell.
Thousands of British Telecom engineers have walked out on strike today, leaving phones in many parts of the country without any repair service. Their union claims that 40,000 engineers walked out in support of colleagues suspended because they wouldn't work overtime. The Union of Communication Workers called a national overtime ban after rejecting the management's 5% pay offer. Carol Walker reports.
British Telecom has 110,000 engineers to maintain the country's vast telephone system. They're responsible for maintaining phone boxes, private telephone lines, office phones, telexes and, of course, the exchanges themselves. Thousands of minor faults occur every day, and with almost half the engineers now on strike, the backlog of repairs is building up fast. In many areas, customers trying to ring for an engineer find the number unobtainable. The severe weather is making matters worse.
Well, it's very serious indeed. The telephone service now is at risk in every district because of the cold weather, because BT management have cut the staff to the bone over the last 2 years, and because of the overtime ban. It's going to be more and more difficult for customers to get telephones and to get them repaired when they go out of service.
All telecoms engineers in the northeast are on strike, though the union insists emergency cover is being maintained. And there have been more walkouts in support of suspended colleagues in Manchester, Sheffield, Nottingham, Leicester and South Wales. In West London, engineers decided to return to work after a threat to suspend 7 men was lifted, but they're still working to rule.
That is carried.
The union claims another 30,000 may walk out tomorrow. Tonight, British Telecom said they regretted the efforts to bring pressure on them by hurting customers. Managers were doing their best to keep lines working, but there were bound to be some delays in repairing faults.
British Telecom today, both inside and out. Throughout the eastern counties, telephone engineers have been taking action in support of colleagues suspended for refusing to end an overtime ban. Heavy demand from subscribers has also had a disruptive effect. Some exchanges have been so overloaded that they haven't been able to operate. And at one stage, British Telecom appealed to customers to make only essential calls.
The new Norwich exchange was in chaos. The telephone system seemed to collapse completely for nearly 2 hours, and for much of the day, callers had difficulty in getting lines. British Telecom's slogans seemed little more than a sick joke to people who knew who they had to phone but hadn't the means to do so. Although nearly all the area's 900 telephone engineers were on strike, British Telecom maintained the problems weren't due to industrial action but heavy congestion by callers overloading the exchange. Pickets from the Union of Communications Workers were on duty outside telecom offices throughout the region. They're angry about pay, and more particularly about the suspension of some union members who've refused to work overtime.
We did not decide to close any exchanges or anything. Our members merely refused to work voluntary overtime. Management decided to suspend them for refusing to do that. Now, it was made quite clear to management what the results of their sending people home would be. Obviously, when members are sent home, the rest of the members must follow them in support.
So today it's an all-out stoppage for 24 hours?
It is, yes.
Now, in that case, when an exchange goes down, like the new Norwich exchange has done today, people can't make 999 calls.
This could quite well be true. I hope if the situation is so that management will begin to acknowledge the situation. But as you know, nationally, management have been saying that they are quite capable of handling the situation. These are the messages that are coming across from the top.
So are you leaving it to the managers to try and sort out the problem today?
We certainly are.
It was a similar story throughout the region. Telecom vans were idle at the Ipswich depot, and engineers taking part in the action held a strike meeting at a local pub. In most districts, British Telecom's fault repair service wasn't operating, though nowhere experienced the sort of chaos suffered in Norwich. In all, thousands of engineers from Northampton to Colchester took part in the stoppage. Though they should be back at work tomorrow, the dispute looks set to continue.
40,000 British Telecom engineers have walked out in a pay dispute which threatens telephone chaos for millions around the country. Hundreds of staff have been suspended for refusing to work overtime, and the industrial action is spreading. In northeast England, even 999 calls are at risk after engineers withdrew emergency cover. Phone lines in Manchester and Norwich have been hit, and repair services in Wales, the Midlands, southern and eastern England are also restricted. Vital phone and computer links in the city face disruption, and some television programmes could also be affected.
Telecom engineers were providing emergency cover throughout most of Britain as the thaw flooded underground tunnels carrying phone cables. Here a water main has burst. The engineers said as it was emergency work, they'd fix it.
How can we put in properly and tell we are working, we're not on strike?
But the action is spreading and thousands of people have found their phones have been cut off.
The last thing I want is for the ordinary customer to be hurt. BT over the last 2 years have hit them hard enough with reducing the service and with increasing the bills. We don't want the domestic customer to be hit. Our argument is with big business, and we certainly have bent over backwards to protect the emergency services.
At mass meetings today, the engineers repeated their opposition to the British Telecom offer for 5% pay increase in return for changes in their working practices. Telecom says it's the best offer they can make.
It's still on the table, and it's a very fair and good offer. It's over twice the rate of inflation on the rate to start with, and then bonuses thereafter. And one way or another, we feel that the union should really give very close consideration to the offer we've already made.
The city would be badly hit by any lengthy dispute, since it now relies almost exclusively on phone lines for its sophisticated computer systems. And there could also be some disruption of television programmes if telecom staff at outstations around the country support the dispute. Mark Webster, ITN, British Telecom.
The region's telephone network was thrown into chaos as engineers staged a one-day strike today. In some areas, even 999 calls were blocked. There was overwhelming support for the strike, which was in sympathy with colleagues suspended for taking part in a nationwide overtime ban imposed in support of a pay claim.
Pickets were out in force today as at least 5,000 British Telecom engineers throughout the region joined the strike in the eastern counties. Pickets at Bedford said only 2 people out of a total of 430 had reported for work. Mass meetings like this one at Norwich were held throughout the region to express union anger and bitterness at the suspensions. In Peterborough, the union claimed almost total support for the strike by the branch's 1,100 members.
We're obviously now taking action to try and get our victimised members reinstated. If British Telecom decide now to suspend those of us who took strike action today, there is a threat of that. If they decide to do that, then obviously we could end up with none of our members in work for a period of time.
The walkout had an immediate and drastic effect on services. Telephone lines to businesses in Norwich were out of order, and several police stations in the region, including King's Lynn, were cut off.
Why is British Telecom taking the relatively hard line of suspending people who won't work normally?
Yeah, I don't like the word suspend. What has happened is people who've decided that they won't work normally have been sent home. All we're saying is that really until they're prepared to say that they will work normally and as directed, which is what their contract says they must do, then we don't really want to see them back.
How long can you stand industrial action of this nature before the service really does begin to suffer, begin to break down?
That's a fairly leading question to which I guess a lot of people would like the answer. It won't surprise you if I don't actually quote a figure.
The striking engineers have accused BT of ignoring their efforts in battling through blizzards in recent days to carry out emergency repairs. But the company say the union is damaging the newly privatised company and putting its own members' jobs at risk.
One of the worst affected areas was Norwich, where there was a near-total breakdown. It was even impossible to make 999 calls. But the union put the blame firmly on BT. The area chairman spoke to Rebecca Atherstone.
People were unable to get 999 calls. Norwich itself was off for 2 hours this morning. And again this afternoon during peak periods, it just cannot stand up to the traffic. And in doing so, it loses 999 calls, which is very frightening.
What happens now, and how long is this action going to go on for?
Well, not very long, we hope. We've got no intention of hurting the public. We're very concerned about the public, and I've had a meeting with staff today, and I've coordinated across the district, and the position is that we will be attempting to return to work tomorrow morning as normal, and to try to carry on the position we were in before Friday. It's highly likely that management will make attempts to amend the contracts of staff, preventing them taking any sort of action again if they feel it strongly. In those conditions we could not stay. But if management are prepared to accept our members back tomorrow unconditionally, then we will certainly start working normal again, and hopefully we can get round the table and start talking.
How sure are you of that this action is going to cease?
I can't be sure of anything. It concerns me. I mean, the present attitude of management seems that even though we're losing 999 calls and the rest of it, they're prepared to live with it, and we're horrified.
A Cambridge...
The strike over pay by British Telecom engineers has spread today, but there's likely to be more disruption to phone services tomorrow. The National Communications Union has called for an all-out stoppage in London tomorrow. It says that more than half the 110,000 staff throughout the country are already refusing to work.
Telephone engineers have been taking action over a pay claim, and the union's executive committee decided today to stage further 24-hour strikes. Engineers in London are being called out tomorrow, and there'll be another 24-hour walkout on Thursday in areas that haven't been affected by strike action so far. This includes Scotland and Northern Ireland. The union says this will involve about 60,000 of its members. It says a further 40,000 held 24-hour strikes yesterday, and they were locked out this morning when they refused to sign forms saying they would work normally. A British Telecom spokesman said they would be doing everything possible to minimise any disruption to customers.
The telephone dispute escalated dramatically today as British Telecom suspended thousands of engineers. Widespread disruption of services is inevitable, and BT have appealed to people to make emergency calls only. Picketing has already been stepped up in Northampton, where engineers voted to continue their strike. They've been joined by nearly 100 clerical workers who walked out in sympathy. In the Mid-Anglia region, 2,500 engineers were suspended for refusing to sign guarantees to end their overtime ban. And 900 engineers are still out in Norwich. Union leader John Moore was asked how close the system was to breakdown.
It's anyone's guess, but certainly we believe that the system will not stand up. It is losing processing power because of equipment which in its normal function misoperates or locks out, and certainly with reduced power it will not stand up to peak periods.
Does it mean that life and death 999 calls will be lost, won't get through?
It most certainly does. I mean, during yesterday, that actually happened. You could not get any call of any description through the exchange. The exchange was completely swamped.
More British Telecom engineers in the region who turned up for work today were sent home by management after they refused to sign an agreement to work normally. It's leading to a growing backlog of repair work, and in some areas callers are having difficulty getting an outside line. The dispute is already adding to the problems caused by the recent Arctic weather.
Across the region, engineers reported for work today that the dispute didn't end, it just got worse. In Northamptonshire and Essex, clerical staff joining the protest. As engineers checked into their offices in Colchester, their vans blocked the entrance to the main exchange. They were asked to sign a commitment to work normally, including overtime. BT claims several hundred in the region did sign, the vast majority refused. In Norwich, a mass meeting of engineers agreed to maintain their stand, stressing that the dispute isn't just about pay, but protecting jobs and maintaining services to the public. The new city exchange, which yesterday all but collapsed under the weight of calls, fared a little better today. But there were still problems and frustration for some would-be callers in the area.
Emergency, sorry, transfer charge for Forest and Edmonds, what number?
The 999 emergency service has been operating normally. BT says the dispute has meant a growing backlog of repairs and new lines aren't being installed, but it claims the greatest impact on services has been the weather.
What we were faced with yesterday was an appreciable increase on what we would normally handle on an automatic telephone network.
Since you've been privatised, people expect you to be efficient and modern. Shouldn't you have a system that can cope with any such eventuality?
I think people do recognise that we have a very efficient and a system that's being modernised very, very quickly indeed. It is not possible to plan for every eventuality. What we do is plan an exchange network which has a level of capacity which will meet normal increases in traffic.
If this dispute with the engineers goes on, isn't the situation going to get very serious?
Well, we are very anxious to bring the dispute to an early conclusion, and I'm hopeful that a lot of our staff who are normally magnificent in situations like this, will start to come back to work. All we're asking them to do is to confirm that they're prepared to work normally, and we'll be pleased to see them back.
But tonight, as pickets maintained their chilly vigil, their union warned that all its 110,000 British Telecom engineers throughout the country will be taking industrial action by Thursday.
The British Telecom dispute will spread to the City of London tomorrow, threatening major disruption of the money markets. Today, union leaders claimed the management wanted a rough house and warned they'd give them a bloody nose.
Over most of the country, the phone engineers manned the picket lines. 30,000 out in protest over suspensions. Another 25,000 had been locked out, the union claimed, for refusing to sign a declaration to British Telecom that they'd work overtime and weekends when required. London, Scotland, Northern Ireland and the South West were about the only areas working today. They're threatened over the next 2 days. In the city, still coping with the hiccups of Big Bang, the engineers voted for an indefinite walkout, potentially a big headache. The union's industrial action room was advising members to stand firm. They say the dispute will snowball with 100,000 out by next week.
A lot of money could be lost in the City of London, of course, if telecommunication services there are affected, if repairs aren't undertaken. And of course, Whitehall, there can be great confusion in government circles if the telecommunication system in Whitehall and in the House of Commons breaks down.
British Telecom say they'll take all possible steps to minimise disruption to their 21 million customers. Michael Green, ITN, Central London.
The telephone dispute escalated dramatically today as British Telecom suspended thousands of engineers. Union leaders warned that the entire telephone network is now in danger of total breakdown. About 6,000 staff have been sent home in the eastern region. In Northampton, engineers were joined on the picket line by nearly 100 clerical staff. They walked out in sympathy with men who were suspended. The dispute over a pay claim has been dragging on for more than 6 months. But the threat of a total stoppage increased today when BT demanded that all their engineers sign an undertaking to end their overtime ban. When they refused, they were sent home. BT's Anglian Coastal District claim there's no effect on the automatic call system and the 999 emergency service, despite yesterday's problems when many callers found it impossible to dial at all. And again, one of the worst hit areas was Norwich.
Good afternoon. I have a call for you.
British Telecom pleaded with their 200,000 customers in the Norwich area today, don't phone unless it's essential. But BT insists severe problems at the Norwich Exchange in the past 48 hours have nothing to do with the dispute. At times, it's been virtually impossible to dial numbers in Norwich.
These exchanges are designed to carry a normal level of telephone traffic as economically as possible. And what we've had to deal with in recent weeks is a very high level of calls, well above the normal that we would expect, and that is what's caused the problem.
It is pure coincidence that this has happened at a time when the engineers are taking industrial action.
Absolutely.
The engineers are adamant it is their action which they claim has brought the exchange to the verge of collapse. Today, 100 of them refused to sign a BT document which they maintain would change their working practices. Their security passes were confiscated and they were sent home. 800 colleagues stayed out in support. The engineers say emergency 999 calls are now at risk.
We're horrified that BT will take a decision to live with that sort of condition. Our members just can't believe that anyone could be that hard-nosed. We certainly can't.
But it's your action that has brought about this?
No, certainly not. You know, we would handle these calls. BT are making it impossible. They're stripping our members of their cards, their pass cards, their keys and everything, their equipment. They just can't go and handle them. BT have taken that decision.
Emergency service, please.
BT say there's no threat to emergency calls. Managers will keep the system working.
No risk at all, really, above normal. We have people who are helping us keep the service going, and we've every confidence that we'll keep the network going for some time.
Meanwhile, the plea to make only essential calls remains in force, a request which leaves BT's advertising slogan looking a little lame.
It was business as usual at the waterfront today, preparations underway for events tonight and tomorrow.